Let me just check that. Right, I've got recording up at the top right. You never know how these things are going to work, do you? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It says it's recording, but we never know. Okay, today I have the pleasure of interviewing Phil Mitchell, then a highly qualified and senior accredited counsellor, psychotherapist and supervisor with 20 years experience. Phil has dedicated his career to supporting adults, children and young people, specialising in working with boys and men who experience sexual abuse or exploitation. Alongside his therapeutic work, Phil is a senior trainer, speaker and supervisor known for his expertise in addressing masculinity's role in trauma recovery. Welcome, Phil. It's brilliant to have you here. I wanted to speak to you for a long time. How are you this morning?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. You've given me quite a grand introduction there. I hope I can live up to it. There are certainly a lot more people than I who are more experienced, a lot more qualified than I am. But so I don't know if I can live up to that very lovely introduction you've given me. But I'll see what I can do.
That's great. Well, I followed you on Twitter for a long time, and I think the work you do on Twitter is as valuable as anything you probably do within the studio environment. So, or within your practice. There are a few things I just want to really sort of bounce off you, really, and this is the way I like to talk about people, because my audience, of course, overwhelmingly men, and of course we have got, especially within the school I run, which is a virtual flying school, people do have traumas, and these traumas come out within the work that we do. And of course, this is the sort of thing that you do all the time. Can you start off for us, just in case people don't know or don't follow you, about your own experiences with possibly the abuse and how you've approached your role with counselling and therapy and how you got to where you are?
Well, I guess for me, I mean, it's all a bit of a mishmash, really. I was bullied very badly in school, lots of violence, lots of horrible stuff, and so it was quite severe. And so that kind of really got me into counselling, and I started eventually seeing the school counsellor, and that was what prompted me to think, I want to do this, and then 30 years later, here we are, and I'm doing it. But I think when it comes to sort of boys and men and my own experience of abuse, again, there's a connection, but a bit of a mismatch as well. So, yes, I was sexually exploited at the age of 16, which I didn't really realise until I was in my 20s, a long time later. And I was raped at the age of 21, just before my 21st birthday. And I think I could clearly see that the rape was bad and wrong and abusive and illegal. But even then, that didn't help me realise that the sexual exploitation I went through at 16 was abusive. I just thought it was weird and it was in the past and that was it. And it was, I guess, those experiences to some degree did influence my decision to get into working more with boys and men who've been abused. And I guess now, like I say, I see a number of, I work with girls and women as well, of course, but of the clients that I see in my practice, the majority of them are boys and men who have experienced not just sexual abuse, which is how it originally started, but all different types of abuse. Domestic abuse, physical abuse, coercive control, various controlling relationships, financial abuse, paternity fraud, false allegations, historic child sexual abuse, sexual assaults as an adult, lots of different types, sort of quick, horrific things that took, minutes to happen, other things that have gone over a prolonged period of time. So lots of diversity within that.
Yeah, is there any difference then? I just want to ask this question because I know in the military structure there most definitely is. With what we call post-traumatic stress, obviously it's a word that's been thrown around a lot now. This is my own interest, really. What I tend to find with people with a sudden impact into their natural being, so their natural everyday life that they're going through, a sudden impact, whether a violent impact, it might be a road accident, it might be an assault. These people would have a response to that stressor, as it were. And that stress you could localize within that event. They've had a road accident. Therefore, there's a stress response. But I also get a lot of men that come through my school that have had a continuous stressor, which I would argue would be a micro trauma, but going on for a very long period of time. And their response to that stress can often be more significant than someone that's had a very severe localized event. Is that the same within and I honestly don't know, is that the same within the field that you work in?
I think it really does vary from one person to the next. I've known of people that were violently assaulted on a night out. So this one incident, but it's had a huge impact on their life. It often makes them question their identity, explore their masculinity, affect their self-worth, self-esteem, so on and so on. and I've worked with people that have kind of been in controlling relationships where they experience violence and abuse almost on a daily basis for a number of years. And I think it's not as simple as saying, well, the person who's experienced abuse on a daily basis for a number of years, it must be worse for them than this person who experienced this one violent event. Yes, no, there's lots of other factors to consider. The actual abusive event itself, whilst very relevant, it's not alone. You can't consider it alone. It's almost like their morals, their values, their principles, their identity, support networks, the context around it. So it really varies from case to case.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense, actually, to be fair. What do you see the changes? And I hate the fact I'm just having to hit all these kind of questions, but I mean, obviously intrigued by this. The changes that you've seen within sort of masculinity over the years that you've been practicing. Is it any different now than it was, say, 20 years ago or 10 years ago?
I guess if I would say change is an interesting word. I think that the change that I'm seeing is, well, is sadly a negative change. It's how society, media, the government seem to put so much energy and effort into demonizing masculinity, implying and in some cases explicitly stating it is bad, it is harmful for you. We need to abandon masculinity. It's a bad thing, and I think that narrative is getting worse. We're hearing more of it, and we've got boys in school being taught these sorts of messages. There are messages being given to men at work, and that sort of thing. And it's that's what's changing, and that's the harmful thing. And for me, it really blows my mind, to be honest, that we've got large groups of people over here saying men need to talk more, they need to open up more, they need to come, that we want to help them more. Oh, and by the way, your masculinity is bad, abandon it. It's like, hang on a minute, whoa. Masculinity is a very natural part of being on the planet. We all have it to varying degrees, just like we all have femininity to varying degrees. But to kind of demonize masculinity, to say it's bad, to say it or to focus so much on it in the way that we do, and then to not consider how that's going to adversely affect boys and men. I think, what are we thinking here? We would never, ever take an aspect of somebody else's identity or another demographic's identity and demonize it and talk about it in the way, or as often as we do in that way, with masculinity.
Yeah, I imagine if we did that with femininity. I mean, I saw a thing on. I think you must have posted something in the past. It was a celebrity talking to. He did a documentary. In fact, he was talking to young men in a school, and he was saying, "What do you understand by toxic masculinity?" And these were young men who must have been in their early teens, and they were so articulate for young men. They were just so articulate, and I just thought this is such a shame the world they're walking into, because one of the men said, "Well, toxic masculinity, so it doesn't really make sense to me. It's like everything that I'm supposed to be is being sort of pushed down. I'm being told it's wrong." But they knew it was wrong. And I remember thinking, how long, because obviously they're getting it from school and from home, and they're getting it from every quarter from the television set. I remember thinking, how long before we've got these men in society who aren't useful to us? They're not useful men. They're not confident men. They're not men out building things or whatever it might be, because they've been pushed down. It was a very sad thing to see, the whole sort of capitalization on toxic. I don't even look at toxic masculinity. I look at masculinity. I mean, in my school, this is something we drive. We look at the guardian of the family. We look at the producer. We look at the responsible adult, the person that's going out to contribute to society. In your work, then, obviously you don't challenge this notion, but how do you support the notion of masculinity within, especially people who have been abused, and I guess look at their masculinity as fractured or devalued in some way?
Again, it's case by case. For quite a few boys and men, masculinity doesn't come up. The word doesn't even have to be said. It might not be relevant. Sometimes elements of masculinity can come up, and we might explore that, and we might say the word masculinity, we might not. Some of the boys and men I've seen over these, they will say the word masculinity, and I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? And, I don't want to make assumptions. What does it mean to you, and what does it not mean? So rather than kind of thinking that masculinity is bad or harmful, it's about being open to the possibility that it can be an absolutely wonderful, useful tool. Now, expressions of masculinity, and I often quote a lot of the work by John Barrett and Martin Seeger, who are chartered psychologists, great guys. They've done loads of work and research on masculinity, and you know, their literature is amazing, and it completely helped my practice. But of course, expressions of masculinity can be harmful. Of course they can. Expressions of masculinity can be very helpful. And I would argue, if we look at the last 100 years, for example, we've seen more expressions of masculinity being helpful than harmful. But what we often do is that phrase toxic masculinity is used, and some people use it to say, well, but masculinity can be expressed in a really toxic way. Yeah, of course it can. But the fact that we're using that phrase toxic masculinity so often, and anything bad or harmful or critical that a boy or man does, if he does, well, it must be his toxic masculinity. And so it's not just the problems with the words and how it's used, it's the implications beneath it. So one example, I've worked with a number of guys where they have said they were weak, they were pathetic, they weren't real men, they allowed this horrible thing to happen to them. And so obviously you would explore that, you'd try and understand the thinking behind it, explore what does it mean to be a real man, and what's their views on that. But often what I find is one of the most simplest but most effective ways of working is reframing. You'll take somebody's experience, empathise with it, maybe validate it, explore it, and also say, could there be a different way of looking at that as well? And so, what do you mean? I've no idea what you mean. You know, I'm weak, I'm pathetic. You know, I'm just a weakling. Okay, and could you be strong? What do you mean? I've no idea what you mean. Well, you know, for example, it might be that you want to come to therapy, but you don't really like being here, you don't feel comfortable being here, you think that it's actually shows that you're really weak being here. But actually what I'm hearing, another side, is that you're here even though it's uncomfortable, but you're still here despite it being uncomfortable. You're working through that process, and you're here because something's happened and you want to confront that and take control of your life, and you're going to do that going through a process that right now doesn't feel very comfortable. I mean, that sounds more like strength than weakness to me. And so you take the actual situation, if you like, accept how they see it, but also offer a different perspective. But the different perspective that you're offering via the reframing method is using elements of masculinity within that. And then I often find, oh, right, yeah, I never thought of it like that. And when guys sit opposite me and they'll say, I never thought of it like that, great, you can see that change is starting to happen.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic how you take that negative and you spin it around into a positive. Because I think for men especially, personal opinion, I went through therapy, you know, I left the military. It's so hard to sit there in front of another guy. And also I must admit, it works guy to guy for me personally. I just never worked guy to woman, especially like marriage counseling. It just did not work. I think guys need to sit in front of another guy. Personally, that's how I feel about it. But it's also, I think maybe it's a small number of voices, isn't it, shouting about toxic masculinity, and they're shouting loudly. Do you find the same thing with I'll tell you what, misandry. Now, my sister was a police officer, and well, she still is a police officer. She didn't know the word misandry for a very long time until I kind of had to explain it to her. I said, well, you know, misogyny. She's like, yeah, misogyny. I said, well, it's kind of like that, but for women, it's misandry. And she said, oh, I'll look it up. And she said, oh, yeah, this happens a lot, domestic abuse and everything else. But she hadn't put a name to it. She hadn't heard the word because it hadn't been socialized on all the media stuff that's hitting us 24/7.
Yeah.
Do you find with the misandry aspect on social media that again it is the same people doing it the whole time, or do you find that it's a bit more widespread than that?
I think it's more widespread. I think you've got certain perhaps well-known individual high-profile people that will make comments that I think sometimes, is that from a place that promotes misandry? Maybe, probably, possibly. Others blatantly. So, you know, the common kill all men. Kill all men, kill all men, kill all men. You know, a while ago that was trending. You know, horrible comments. You know, kill all men. Let's increase the male suicide rate. Men should go to war and die. Men are just wallets. You know, who cares about mental health, male mental health, etc., etc., etc. All of this sort of stuff. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that certain comments like that are never directed at girls and women. Of course they are. However, and whilst it's wrong and terrible on both sides, I regularly check. You go to Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. You go to Twitter and type and search for things. You will find more profiles dedicated to hating men than hating women. You will find more profiles on Twitter dedicated to kill all men than kill all women. You will find more profiles on Twitter, people dedicating themselves to being a proud misandrist than a proud misogynist, right? And it's there, it's blatant, it's absolutely clear. And the question I have is, what are we doing about that? Well, I would argue very little. Whereas if the number of profiles that were anti-men, should we say, if those were anti-women, it'd be all over the media, it'd be terrible, it'd be how. Whereas when it's men, we just seem to care a lot less. And it is absolutely rife. It really is. It's absolutely out there. And you often get commentators saying, well, it's just mean people online saying mean things. No, it's not. It's not just that at all. Never. What it is, it's a large number of people going online proudly and publicly saying they hate men, they think they should all be killed, and so on. And whilst a lot of those don't actually want all men to die, although some do explicitly say, yes, I do mean it, what this clearly evidences, and this is something that's just obvious, what it evidences is a hateful, contemptible, prejudiced attitude towards boys and men. And so if it evidences that sort of attitude, the next question I think we should be asking, that we're not, is how might that attitude influence certain behaviour towards boys and men?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Do you think then that this kind of behaviour, I mean, obviously young people are impressionable, of course they are. And I don't really want to go too much into the incel community because I don't see a community. You may see a community, but I never really have found one as such. You may find your chat room. Do you think this pushes men or young men towards people like, and I'm going to say Andrew Tate? I would argue that the people that I've spoken to and the people in my school have got more benefit from people like Jordan Peterson, of course, who are a lot more nuanced in their view. What do you see when people come in and you're talking to people and they say, well, actually, do they say, well, actually, I'm leaning on Andrew Tate, or do they say, well, actually, I'm leaning on Jordan Peterson, or is it not something they've even thought about? Do they not get value from
I've
that?
seen quite a lot of boys and young men and older men who have mentioned explicitly Jordan Peterson. Definitely, and how they like some of his quotes, they see some of his clips. They don't agree with everything he says, and that's fine. But I think that's another issue now. You know, if you've got sort of a public figure who says a few things that are absolutely terrible and you don't like, well, but then there is something he does like. Well, it must mean you like every single thing he says. No, not at all. You know, it's kind of the point that he has made you agree with. And so I've had guys that have said, "Oh, Jordan Peterson says this." You know, various comments that he's made. I agree with that. I like it. It makes logical sense. We need more people to talk like that. I have not seen one, well, that I know of, where it's explicitly said. I've had more guys that I've seen that have said, I don't agree with what Andrew Tate does. I think he's terrible. I think he's awful. I think he's arrogant. I don't like it. Not one person has said anything amazingly positive about him like they have with John Peterson. What some people have said to me is that actually they can see why some people might be drawn to Andrew Tate because he is a public figure who has said some positive, inspirational things about men. And where else are boys and men going to go for that these days?
Yeah.
And so it's a case of, if you are deprived of acceptance and support, then maybe you'll take it anywhere you can get it, even if it comes with a lot of inappropriate comments. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that for a lot of boys and men, that's how they seem to see it. But as I've said, I've seen more boys and men, and not just in practice, but also boys and men that I speak to widely, who have said they really like what Jordan Peterson says. I've not heard any good things about Andrew Tate.
Yeah, I think Andrew Tate, you've got this sparkle, haven't you? You've got the cars, you've got the women, you've got the success, you've got the success in a combat sport, of course, because he was a kickboxer, and that will attract men straight away. Whereas someone like Peterson, you've got to watch a man sitting in a chair thinking through what he's going to say and then saying it. And of course, it's not that latch onable, is it, for young men? They don't kind of go straight for Peterson. And of course, the thing about Peterson as well that I found, especially when he first came out, it was with the Kathy Newman interview, of course. You've got to sit through an interview on Channel 4, and no one's sitting through an interview on Channel, not if you're young, to then work out what is being said and what exactly is being said, and why is Kathy Newman doing this. There was something actually I did actually copy something here. I wanted to talk to you about this just recently on LBC. And I have no interest or no negativity or positive about this. But it was Carol Vorderman. I don't know much about Carol Vorderman apart from the countdown history, of course. But she does seem to obviously be doing a lot more on public forums. And on LBC the other day, there was a man that called up and he was complaining about family courts for men and the difficulty, which we all know, of course. And she said, he said, society has a lot of contempt for men. There's a quote from Jordan Peterson, and she stopped him and said, no, I'm not having that on my show. Now, that was a public thing that went out during the daytime, and people saw that. It's almost like that we allow this is acceptable, and we don't allow someone else to call in and say, hang on, if you want to have people that are going to talk about things on your show, you have to accept things that might be a little bit uncomfortable. One of the phrases that Jordan Peterson's used, in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. And of course, he said that in the Kathy Newman interview. Do you think now we are in a world where it is so uncomfortable to be offended? I had a man the other day saying, I don't want to talk about this, Tim. It wasn't even something that would be considered offensive. And I said, you're in my school. We are talking about your performance. There's no two ways about it. If you want to be a student here, it's only him and me. But people they feel they have a right to not be offended. And these are grown men sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think regardless of, men, women, boys, girls, whatever, there's that, I think there's a difference between someone wanting to cause offence and someone being offended. And I think it was Ricky Gervais who said something along the lines of, no, you've taken offence. I've not caused it. I mean, he might have worded it a bit better than I just have. But I think there is that actually how I feel. If I feel uncomfortable, upset, a little bit criticised, then that's enough to justify demanding people stop doing things. No, it's not. No, it's not. We have to have context. We have to have scales. We have to build resilience. We have to accept that in life, we have one of the things we often talk about is diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we often talk about demographics, which is all fair enough, But one of the sort of parts of diversity we rarely talk about is difference of opinion, different view, different morals, values, principles, ethics, all of that sort of stuff, yeah? Okay? And I would argue that they are just as important, maybe sometimes perhaps even more important than other sort of demographic differences. It's like, actually, it might be someone believes in God, someone doesn't believe in God, right? Can you have a respectful debate where you agree to disagree, where you are open to hearing the other person's point of view? Not agree. No. This is my opinion. That is it. I believe so firmly in my opinion that it is fact. And if you try and challenge me, I will cancel you. And there are people out there encouraging this way of being, and it's like, no, not at all. No, it's, people that go online and say horrible, hateful things. You can agree, you can disagree, you can report their tweets and things like that. But I think, sometimes if someone is willing to engage in a respectful debate, and I often, I try not so much these days, but anyone who expressed certain opinions on Twitter, I might say, okay, are you interested in having a respectful discussion / debate about this? You get insults, you get attacks, you get all of this. There's not really much point. But if someone is going, yes, okay, well, you can have a debate back and forth, and you might disagree, but that's okay. You might think their opinion is nonsense, but that's okay, and you might say why. But you can have that debate and maybe be better for it or learn from it, but still both opponents have got their views. But I think there's something there about, as John Peter says, you've got to be able, you might feel offended. And so what do you do with that? And it's not as simple, you're either offended or you're not. To what scale are you offended? And I think for me, it comes back to this resilience, where I think rather than, I think we are doing a lot less than we used to do to encourage resilience. And that doesn't mean be okay with people being horribly abusive to you. It's about kind of thinking you're going to experience things in life from a little bit annoying to extremely traumatic potentially. And if you group all of that under the same umbrella as, well, no, people need to not do that with me, I'm not sure it helps to build resilience. And again, we need to encourage a good balance, I think, between resilience and vulnerability, maybe.
Phil, there's so much in that we could unpack. There's so much in that, really. When we talk about resilience, not just for men, but for women as well. There was something you said in there. There's a school I follow, actually. I actually met the head teacher called Catherine Burblesing, the Michaela School in London. I need to do a tour there at some point. It's in Wembley. But she's known as the strictest headmistress in the country. And it's a bit of a throwaway line. But she teaches a lot of this stuff that you're talking about, where she has quiet corridors. She forces all the multi-denominational kids to sit around a table together. One person gets the food, another person gets the plates, and it's all vegetarian, so they're not stepping on anyone's religious sensibilities or anything like that. But she makes sure that people have this sort of these boundaries, basically. And she says, this is how far we can go. And she teaches this resilience within the school. They do very well, by the way, academically. And I think a lot of other schools resent that because they say bad things about her. I wonder whether in school, this brings me back to female teachers with male students. And I'm not saying all, crikey, I'm not saying all. Do we think that there is a necessity to put men in roles in men's life within, say, the state system, so that they are challenged and they have these boundaries that are set? Are men more likely to set those boundaries for other men, do you think, than women?
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's probably people out there that have got more knowledge than me on that subject who can probably comment on that more effectively than I can. I think it's interesting. I said, female teachers are teaching attracts generally more women than males, more women than men. That's kind of how it's always been. Is it right? Is it wrong? We could talk about that forever and a day. But I think that there are differences between what men and women are attracted to in careers. I think what worries me in schools is that it's a balance. So some might say we need to get more men to become teachers. That's what we need. Now, there's different schools of thought here. You could say yes, because it would be great for boys and girls in schools to have not just positive female role models, but positive male role models, and to have perhaps difference and balance and diversity within that. So that might be good. And at the same time, I wonder, do we need to maybe accept that, well, teaching will, perhaps maybe not always, but historically, teaching generally will always perhaps attract more women than men, just because of the nature of the job and what it entails, and that there are always going to be average sex differences, and despite certain people's efforts, nothing is ever going to be 50-50, because that's just not reasonable. It's not realistic with the world we live in. So I'm not really too sure what the answer to that is. I'm not even sure what the question is, but I think certainly if we look at the family, what you generally see, and I'm talking about average different. I'm not talking about all mums or all dads. What you often see is, mum on average being that carer, nurturer, that sort of thing, and a dad will. I'm not saying mothers never do it, but a dad is perhaps more likely to put in sort of boundaries, discipline, all of that sort of stuff. There was a really interesting TED talk by Carol Hooven, who's written a book called Testosterone, and it talks about the impact of testosterone on the brain and the body and how it impacts behaviour and choices. Fascinating book, and her TED talk was really, really good. She was basically saying the same thing. She was basically saying that actually, boys on average are more likely than girls on average to rough play, and some people say that that's a bad thing. But she was saying, no, it's not. It's a good thing. It's the effect of testosterone. It helps to create boundaries. And when your dad gets involved, you get the sort of dad to be involved in the creation of those appropriate boundaries. And it starts when the kids are very young, and then it carries on when they're older. So again, I'm not saying mums never impart boundaries or shouldn't. I'm saying on average, you often see that these sorts of behaviours come from a dad on average, and these sorts of behaviours come from a mum on average, and that's absolutely fine. Should we have some of that in schools? Maybe not. I'm not too sure. But I think what's interesting is the documentary you mentioned earlier on, where the boys were recorded on camera saying that, they were basically saying that, a man does something really bad and terrible, and straight away all boys are to blame, all men are bad. It's used to justify, and we don't like that. That's stupid. It's not fair. It's not right. And I think they will not be the only boys in this country that think like that. So my question is, we need to be asking more boys and men what they think, what they feel, how they think they're treated. But we're not. And I suspect that we're not doing that because the results will show a lot of boys and men, a lot of boys in school rather, are fed up of being treated like second-class citizens, public enemy number one. And we just don't want to acknowledge that possibility. So we don't ask the question.
Well, I wouldn't. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I come from a military background, right? So in the military background, there are things that you're doing and you haven't got a choice. We're doing this. All right. And then eventually, as I got older in the military, of course, I'm setting the agenda here. I'm saying we are doing this because I know it works. And if we don't do things in these airplanes, for example, in the correct way, and people just die, and it's everyone involved in aviation understands that. So there is no flex in that. We can discuss it and we can work out whether we can do it better. And we do that a lot, by the way, especially after accidents. But there is only one real way that we're going to get people into these airplanes and keep them safe. It's very interesting you talk about young people, because young people come to me, especially young men, young women as well, but mainly young men, and they talk about military careers and they ask, how is the military now? Because of course, military, it got infested, and I say infested, and I mean infested, by Stonewall, who brought in diversity. And diversity, I think, was particularly mismanaged within the military, especially within the Royal Air Force that I came from. And I saw diversity, as you're saying, as cognitive diversity of thought. But what the Air Force thought is we need black people and we need women because they think differently to white men. And that's why they recruited them in. And I said, hang on. I said, I've flown with a lot of men, I've flown with a lot of women, and they didn't think any differently to me. Like literally, I mean, they all fly airplanes, they all do the same thing, but the Air Force wanted that diversity. And I think that really damaged the way that we look at differences. It didn't need to be that way, but it was pushed and it was celebrated, and it is still celebrated. I've just seen a trans plinth go up in Trafalgar Square, the 4th plinth celebrating transgenderism. The society seems to be wrapped up in this as if there is some agenda from up on high. And what I say to young people is just get your head down, men and women, and just graft into your mid-20s, and you're going to accelerate everyone else who's wrapped up in this stuff. Don't look outside. Just get your head down, get the exams, get your qualifications. And my nephew, who's 11, Phil, hasn't got a father. So when he comes up here, we're rolling around doing press ups in the snow, all that kind of stuff, to try and get that kind of masculine nature, that masculine aspect into him. But again, he was running around like 6 to 8 year olds do. You couldn't stop him. He didn't want to sit in a classroom. And I do know that, I do believe I read in European schools, Germany, I think they've got forest schools where they're very young and they don't put them in the classroom, in the seat. They get them to run around and get rid of all that energy. And I just wonder why we have to put these young people who don't want to be sat in school, why we have to sit them in the classroom. It's almost like we're manufacturing some kind of factory worker for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think Richard Reeves, in his book called Of Boys and Men, spoke a lot about that. And he spoke about sort of education boys, and he suggested, some quite unusual, perhaps, ways of educating boys and girls slightly differently. Some people often said girls are human beings, boys are human doings. And I think some people have found that comment quite offensive. I don't think it's meant to be offensive. I think it's just a short, snappy way of saying that girls are more likely to sit still than boys are. There's that action-orientated stuff. Boys have got a lot more testosterone than girls. It has an impact in movement, action, all of those things. So it can be a tricky one. We know that a lot more boys than girls. I think a report came out a few weeks ago in the UK where more boys than girls are excluded. Could that be from a biological point of view because boys are more sort of movement and action orientated, and then that might play a part perhaps in why they're excluded? And rather than considering that, we're just labelling them as troublemakers. Who knows? There's all of these problems with it. I mean, I'm a bit embarrassed to say it, but years ago, I used to firmly believe that the differences on average that we see between how males and females behave was all because of environment, society, and upbringing. I thought it had nothing to do with the brain and biology. And I'm a bit embarrassed to say that now, because since then, right. I've read huge amounts of literature, research, and I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And it's the balance of both. Environment has an impact on us, and so does biology. There is a wealth of research spanning years, constantly showing, well, this is the impact of testosterone. It's this, it's that. It doesn't mean that all boys and men should behave just in this way, or that all girls and women should behave in just this way. What it generally means, if we leave people to it without interfering, you'll generally see that boys and men will make what we might call stereotypical male choices, and girls and women might make stereotypical female choices. But if that's their choice and they're happy with it, why does that have to be a problem?
Absolutely right. I mean, something I was going to talk to you about was, I think Peterson's mentioned this in the past, was the gender equality paradox. I believe it's called the
Yes.
Scandinavian paradox. Yeah. So you're aware of it.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating. And I believe it was in Scandinavian countries where they, if I'm correct here, and you correct me, Phil, that they tried to make them more equal, didn't they, with STEM roles
Yes.
opening up for women and things like this. And what they found was the more, is it egalitarian a society, the more equal a society they made with the offerings for jobs for men and women, the less it became so. So the
Yeah,
more that
absolutely.
women went into female stereotype, healthcare, teaching, education, all that kind of stuff, and the men went into more the STEM subjects, the oil industry and
It was
engineering.
the research by Stowett and Geary from 2018, I believe it was, where I think that was right. So it was basically in a nutshell, without going too deep into it, is basically saying that in the Scandinavian countries, the more the more open-minded, the more gender equality was there. They were saying that everywhere in the world, it's the Scandinavian countries where it really promotes egalitarianism, fairness, equality, great opportunity. They expected to see a lot more sort of men choosing what you might call stereotypical female jobs, and a lot more women choosing stereotypical male jobs. That's not. We saw the opposite. We saw the opposite. And now lots of people have said, yes, but that's just proof of kind of society and rigid gender roles being enforced regardless. Is it not? I don't know. We could debate that all day. But I think the findings, given the methods, are very, very interesting. And I think what really scares me sometimes is the narrative that when you see boys playing with trucks and I don't know, action figures and that sort of thing, that people say, well, that's just toxic masculinity. And I'm like, wow, why is that? And anything that is now deemed stereotypical that boys and men do is deemed as toxic masculinity. Well, first of all, define toxic masculinity. What do you mean? And as I said, John Barry from the Centre for Male Psychology, he did some research.
I know John.
He's great, John. He did some research very recently showing how toxic masculinity is basically toxic terminology. It doesn't help boys and men. Why are we using it? And so, first of all, you've got to define it, but I would also argue just don't use that term, use something else. But there's just so much there. If you've got a boy that is playing with action figures and trucks and things, and then he goes on to play football, and then he goes on to do boxing, you might describe some of that behaviour as very stereotypically macho and male, but is it harmful? Is he happy doing that? Is he hurting anyone? Or is it good for him mentally, physically and emotionally? Yeah, probably. So where is anything toxic about that?
So interesting you say this, because of course in the military it used to be very, very masculine. And of course under the last chief of air staff, the last boss, he tried to make, well, his idea was to make the military 40% women and 20% minority by 2030. That's what he was going to do, make the Royal Air Force that. So he was going to force that. There's no reason. It wasn't going to, there was nothing proven. Of course, my argument is, well, hang on a second, why make it 40% women? Why don't you make it 50% women? Sounds pretty sexist to me. I was playing with it, you know what I mean? But of course, the truth is, you picked a figure out of thin air. Now, I trained a lot of women on this airplane, and one of the things, or on many airplanes, and one of the things I remember speaking to the women about was, are they comfortable in this environment, which is overly masculine? Of course, we had women engineers and everything else, but there weren't many women pilots, very, very few, in fact, maybe 2 or 3 amongst 60 or 70 pilots, students and instructors on a squadron like that. And one of the things they would always say is, no, I'm completely happy with it. Yeah, the environment's absolutely fine. And I wonder, especially having left the military, whether they've brought themselves into a masculine environment, because it is overly masculine, of course, and it's never ever going to change. Flying jets is pretty brutal. The road to flying jets is brutal, not only academically, physically, mentally, almost spiritually, because a lot of people die doing it as well. So there's a lot of that spiritualness coming into it. But I wonder whether the women didn't realize how much of a masculine environment they were in, and have sort of managed themselves into that environment, whereas really they didn't necessarily need to. They could have been more female, as it were. But of course, and then when they come out, they write books about it. And I know a lot of people who've written books saying, look at this environment being very masculine. And I wonder whether, as you said, talking about this, I wonder whether the labeling is intentional, Phil. So we can talk about toxic masculinity, but people that do talk about it know that it's not real, know that playing bow and arrows in the woods as young boys isn't toxic masculinity. They know that, of course, because it's ridiculous to think anything else. But they need to keep labeling this in order to maybe keep the balancing of genders correct within society, or whatever their latest thing is. What do you
Well,
think? Is it intentional?
I think that some people do believe it. I think people act, I think, yeah, you're right. There are the parts of society that do believe, oh, they know it's not really toxic, but for various reasons they keep using it. But I think a lot of people do genuinely believe it. I don't know if they've thought about it at a deeper level, about what it means. And I think a lot of people have not considered how the phrase does more harm than good, especially with boys and men that were trying to help and overcome issues and get into therapy and do whatever. I've seen a number of boys and men over the years where they saw either a previous therapist or another sort of professional that was helping them with their mental health, and some of them have said, oh, I saw this person, they were really, really lovely, but they said about, oh, that's your toxic masculinity. And as soon as they heard that, the shutters went right up. Not engaging, not to. And then it's like, well, actually, so why did that professional decide to use that term? Maybe they genuinely thought it was helpful. But I think more and more is being said now. I mean, I think we need even more about how the phrase is not helpful. And so I think anybody who uses the term, it's about having a discussion with them, going, okay, well, what do you mean? Toxic. What does that mean? Give me a definition of toxic masculinity. What does that mean? And some people will say, well, we're not saying toxic masculinity. We're not saying masculinity is toxic. We're saying it can be displayed in a toxic way. Well, yeah, I guess of course it can. Any aspect of someone's identity or demographic or whatever can be displayed toxically. But why are we calling it toxic masculinity? Why not toxic behaviour? Why do we have to focus on the male element, especially as often as we do? It's very hard for especially boys that are growing up in this world to think that the world doesn't hate them when every other day they see toxic masculinity, but they don't see toxic any other demographic entered into that gap. And so I guess, boys are not stupid. They see the massive disparity. And how do they interpret that disparity? Well, the thing is, we're not even asking the question. So we haven't even got the answer. Because the answer is the boys on the documentary that you pointed out, we don't like this, it's affecting us, hang on a minute, we're all being blamed, we're being deemed. This is what these boys were implying. Right, let's ask more boys what they think. Oh no, we can't do that, because we might not like the findings, because the findings might challenge the narrative that certain individuals perhaps want to display.
I think it makes it even worse when you start labeling toxic masculinity. What I see is a lot of men going, well, okay, I've got no place in the world. I'll go and start boxing or get into massive fitness, and they alienate themselves. I think Andrew Tate, for example, is the person, just even saying that word's probably going to get this video taken down, as well as I know. But I think people then go in towards that kind of thing, as opposed to where they could lean on someone like Peterson or someone like John Barry or yourself. They don't. They lean in towards someone like Andrew Tate, because Andrew Tate is saying to them, look, you're hated in the world. You know what I mean? We need to stick together. You need to join my club and pay me money or whatever he's doing. Whereas if they lent on someone else who was more able to sort of articulate their views, which are very difficult to articulate when you're a young person. Of course, we don't have all the knowledge, do we? We don't understand critical reasoning and things like this when we're young. So we lean into other sort of ventures. My one, of course, was alcoholism, and I've changed that now into sort of fitness and education and things like this. But for a young person, they don't know how to do that. There was something I was going to ask you. There's so much, Phil, and I'm very careful what I do talk to you about. One thing I found on Twitter, I found this. I don't know whether you posted something else. It was talking about abuse from female staff on to young men. This came out of America, and I just wonder whether you can lean in on this and just try and help me understand why this might be the case. Because I see a lot of this in the papers at the moment of a woman and I don't want to be a woman and men. I just found this intriguing, but a woman in a position of authority, such as a teaching or anything else, abusing young boys or having sexual relationships with young boys. It seems to me, it seems to be getting bigger. It said here, all juvenile, right? So it was about sexual misconduct in detention centres. 90%, well, 89% were boys reporting abuse by female staff. That's the sexual victimization of men in America. New data challenge of old assumptions. Is this something that's happened recently? Have I missed this somehow? You know what I mean? That there's this position of authority.
It's an interesting one because I think it's still one of those sorts of issues that maybe we don't know as much about as we could.
Right.
Why? Well, there's lots of potential reasons as to why. But I think I think ultimately it depends on what we're calling boys in institutions. So,
Right.
For example, I think I might be wrong on this. I'll say that before I say it. That I think that most people so if we're calling a children's home, for example, an institution, maybe that's
Right.
included in the definition. I don't know. Then that generally attracts more women than men, or it certainly did a few years ago. Whether that's still the same, I'm not too sure. Ultimately, if you've got a number of settings where the vast majority of professionals are going to be women for whatever reason, then I guess logic would say that any adult in those settings, it's going to probably be more women than men that abuse, depending on the numbers and all of that. Now, again, it doesn't mean all women, it doesn't mean most women. Again, you've got to. It feels ridiculous that you've got to say this, but it's the vast majority of women, like the vast majority of men on the planet, all fine, not abusive, all of that. But I think that what we know is, and again, there is plenty of research on this. Institutions, sort of private schools, religious institutions, lots of things like that. There is a wealth of data showing that the majority of victims of sexual abuse within those institutions are boys. Doesn't mean it never happens to girls and so on, but it shows that it is mainly boys. And there's lots of theories as to why the environment, certain messages, perceptions maybe about masculinity. But I think what's really interesting is how the gender is often ignored. So there are certain headlines. There was a case in was it Ireland, I think. There was a big report that came out 2 or 3 weeks ago about sexual abuse in religious institutions in Ireland. And again, the majority of the victims were boys. Now, some newspaper headlines talked about children in Ireland. Some, very few, in my opinion, talked about boys. And I think when it is girls that it's mainly happening to,
I see.
We put the spotlight on girls. When it's boys, we often say children. Girls and boys, again, we say children. There is this, we kind of take the gender out of it. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse that investigated lots of different allegations of historic sexual abuse at children's homes that took place in London. They were producing reports every few months, very interesting and all of that. Most of the reports, certainly from the ones that I read, again, highlighted more boy victims than girl victims. But there was no focus on that. There was no focus on why more boys? What does that mean? What's the perception of gender here? But if it had been more girls, I suspect quite strongly that there'd have been a massive focus on the gender and what that means. You know, we all talk about the Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal, of course.
Yeah.
People don't know that about 80 boys were believed to have been abused. And so whenever the whole Rotherham scandal was mentioned at the time, and even now today when it's referenced, 9 times out of 10 you hear media headlines talking about those girls, those girls, those girls, those girls. Right. There were 80 boys, 80, about that. They are not mentioned. And it's just absolutely appalling in my view that we kind of we kind of hold a big magnifying glass up to the gender of victims when the gender is a girl's, but that magnifying glass turns into a blind eye when those victims become boys.
Well, even then with Rotherham, of course, people didn't really want to talk about that, did they? For many, many years. It took a social worker really to sort of blow that out and risk a whole career on that. And obviously you've written about this before. And one thing I do want to cover is your book, because I've read segments of this, don't get me wrong. The sexual abuse of boys and men, creating an approach for neglected victims. So people can find this, I believe, on Amazon, can't they? Or on your website. You can go there. It's I'm just going to read a bit about here, so then you can fill in the blank spaces if you want. It addresses the often overlooked issue of male sexual abuse. It provides insights into unique challenges faced by male survivors, something I'm really interested in, just obviously the work I do with my school, including the impact of masculinity on the recovery process. And that, I think, is something that people don't realize, that impact, which is what we discussed here, of just being a man on recovering. Because as I said, I went through therapy when I was in the military because another military guy said to me that he'd done it. Shall I go and do it? And you just feel like, what am I doing? Am I a failure here? And it's even just by going through it, it just feels very odd. But the book combines research, therapeutic approaches, and real world experiences to create a comprehensive framework for helping boys and men heal from trauma. And it's a guide for therapists and social workers and professionals. How have you felt your book was received? And do you think that there's another stage to this? Because when I read it, I felt you can go further. I think there's more in this. You know what I mean? You can really explore.
I really hated writing the book, so
right.
I really hope there isn't another stage, because I can talk, but I struggle to write.
Okay.
And so the whole process was not that enjoyable whatsoever. And,
Right.
and when you've read one book 4 times a week, you get bored of it, you get blind to it, and there was all that. And I had some fantastic support, and I had some great proofreaders. I had a number of professionals involved saying, reword that, do that, so that was great. But I think, so ultimately it was, it's still in early days. The reviews, there's not many reviews, but the reviews that are in existence are quite positive, so that's quite nice. I think so far, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any severe critical responses. I imagine there's a chance that probably will happen. But so far, from people that have messaged me, they've said about your book, it was really, really great. One guy messaged me and said, "I've never been sexually abused, but it doesn't matter because certain chapters just highlight how male victims are really poorly treated." And so on. And again, as I say that, I can imagine some people might think, oh, so female victims are treated brilliantly. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is, you get these responses.
Yeah.
It's just about the disproportionate and in some ways unique ways that male victims are treated by society and media, the government, the police, and all of that sort of stuff. And so that's what my book does. It really does. And it also aims, I think it's one of the very few books that focuses on the sexual abuse and sexual assaults of boys and men, but focuses in a way that you can utilize masculinity to deal with what's happened to you and overcome it. I'm not saying all boys and men should absolutely always rely on elements of masculinity. It might not always be relevant, but I think it certainly doesn't have to be abandoned. And so the last few chapters of the book do look at what Martin Seeger calls archetypal masculinity, and how using elements of that can help boys and men overcome the abuse. I've been doing this job for just over 20 years, and in the last what year are we in now? In the last sort of 8-ish years, that is when a lot of my work changed. So I started to read literature, research, and all of this, read about testosterone, the biology, the nature and nurture effect, not just one. And what was really interesting is I changed a lot of the language on my website. So I went from come to therapy, express your emotions, talk about your feelings sort of language, to come to therapy, take action, take control, fix things. I saw a significant increase in men and boys coming to me for therapy. So many that I was turning work down. And then in therapy, and we don't always have to call it therapy, it is, but we don't have to necessarily use that word. But in therapy, I found that using elements of archetypal masculinity to reframe, to explore, to have those discussions, along with other therapeutic methods, of course, I found that boys and men were engaging more, they were talking more, they were thinking about things more, they were making change, and they were experiencing the benefits of those sessions. And so for me, I can say there's two key vague points to running a successful therapy business: making sure your clients achieve a positive outcome and being in profit.
Yes.
But let's be honest, both of those things were achieved via these male-friendly methods. And so for me, I'm thinking it clearly works. And if it didn't work, I'd stop doing it. I'd stop doing it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. I'm so glad you said that as well, because my school is therapy for men, because it's action orientated. And I say to people, I tell people to leave sometimes, like, you're not right here. This isn't for you, because they have to do things that they are told to do. So we have a brief, we set, this is your aim of the sort, this is what I want you to do. And then the harder I push them, very often, the more they want to stay, the more they want to get involved. And the words that you say, commitment, sacrifice, action, these are words that resonate with people that want to do things. One thing I want to finish off with very quickly, and there's so much, Phil, you got to come back on at some point. I get people writing to me saying, get that guy back on, like, give him your channel, make him have a YouTube channel, he can go and do this. Look, physical fitness as something that helps men, and maybe sort of masculine group environments such as gangs and things like this. How do you, especially for guys that are not in gang age of their teens or whatever, or being forced to run around a playground at school, but older men maybe in their 20s or 30s, how important do you feel leaning into fitness, especially hard, humbling, strenuous fitness work? I only say that because it really helped me. I'm a rower, all right, I'm a heavyweight rower, so I'm in a boat, I'm in a pair with another man who's also quite a big guy, and sometimes it gets brutal out there, you know what I mean? It's humbling that the sort of any rower will be going, preach, it's horrible. But also, being part of a rowing club where people expect you to be down there in the cold, dark mornings, to put a boat on with your hands freezing on the water, to do something with other people that you wouldn't be doing unless they were there also. These things for men specifically, my wife also rows, by the way, but she hates it as much as I do sometimes. But for men specifically, how important do you think these things are, leaning into sacrificial fitness and being involved in group activities?
Well, I think for some men, maybe even many men, it's very important. Not for me. I leave the house to put the bins out, and that's as exciting as it gets these days, I'm afraid.
Right. Right.
And so it's stuff. But I think what's really interesting is plenty of men that I've spoken to just say themselves, "Oh, I do this, I do that," and it's all action orientated, movement, sports, sponsored events, running a marathon or whatever. All of that, it contributes towards a sense of purpose. And that physical movement, getting the body going, resilience, discipline, all of that. I find that a lot of men like that. So if they tell me that this is what they do and they find it useful and it's beneficial, it's like, right, okay, is it worth exploring how you can do more of it? Let's explore why it works. How does it help? And then linking into the group sort of mentality. Well, there's lots of anecdotal research behind that. Andy's Man Club, for example, has grown massively now, massively. I don't think they're in every town and city, but they're in quite a lot of town and cities. They've got funding, they have the number of paid staff. And so, so for some men, that the action movement element is important, but at the same time, a number of men are more than happy to sit down in a room and just sit and talk. And I think sometimes it's useful if you're not actually physically moving yourself, what I find can be useful for some men is use action-orientated words rather than the actual movement. I found that can be a real key thing. So Andy's men's sheds. So there are a number of projects across from men's shed. A load of men get together, they talk about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what's going on in their lives, all of that, and they are fixing chairs, building things, and all of that sort of stuff. So, and there is a number of research papers that show the kind of the group dynamic, the coming together and working towards some sort of shared purpose. That can work kind of really well for men on average. So again, it's about having it's not like one size fits all, of course. It's having a variety of things, but yeah, it can absolutely be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Love it. Look, I don't want to keep you, but I do want to just quickly ask you something now, just to let people know where, so what are you working on now, and what are you looking at in the future as you develop your professional sort of career here within this?
It's interesting. I'm kind of working a little less, actually. So, I've gone from working pretty full on Monday to Friday, and now I'm trying to just work Monday to Thursday, and I'm going to try and have a long weekend for the foreseeable future, and self-care, and have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off and all. I mean, a lot of my Fridays spent in a coffee shop reading a book about men's issues or whatever, and I think actually maybe I need to read a book on something that's going to make me laugh rather than be saturated with all the men's stuff all the time. We need a break. Much as I'm passionate about it, we all need a break from it. even though I really did not enjoy writing the first book, the process was very, very stressful. I am considering writing another one, but I emphasise on the word considering. I'm really not totally decided for various reasons yet. And yeah, and again, my practice is quite busy. I see about 5 or 6 people a day, Monday to Friday, and so that keeps me busy and that keeps me going. And I get invited to do a few of these podcasts and chats and things like that, so that keeps me busy as well. And I'm kind of quite happy with that. Yeah, I'm doing some training as well. So again, it's interesting. I kind of, I used to love going all over the country to deliver training, and I still do every now and then, but now I kind of like being at home, being inside, being a bit relaxed. But I am going to Somerset in a few weeks, and I'm delivering a training event there, all about boys, child sexual exploitation, gender bias practice, how we really care and safeguard the girls when they display certain signs, but when a boy displays the certain similar signs, we seem to care less, and why is that? And so that'll be a whole day's training. So I guess that's what's things that I've got coming up.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you at some point about safeguarding. I'd love you to come back on and talk about this, because at the rowing club, one of the biggest issues I've got right now is the safeguarding is so strict that one of our junior coach, in effect, won't let any other adults be around the juniors. Whereas my argument is the adults need to be around the juniors to teach the juniors how to behave, and also to protect the juniors from maybe external threats that come into the rowing club. So we have this weird issue with safeguarding. I'd love to go. We can't now. I've got an hour. You know what I mean? So, and I know your time's precious, but at some point, I'd love to sort of uncover, like, have we gone too far with safeguarding everything else? In the meantime, Phil, how can people find all the amazing work you do? How can they find that? How can they find your book? How can they find where you talk about this kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, you can go to Amazon and just find my book there. It's the sexual abuse of boys and men, creating an approach for neglected victims, is on Amazon. They can, if they want, go to my website. I am going to be updating my website later this year or early next year, so it might change. But at the minute, it's just counsellingwithphil.co.uk. And if anyone is interested in, I don't know, seeing a few tweets, then you can find me on Twitter at PhilMitchell83. And that's me, I guess, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully in the future, come back on when you've written your 6th or 7th book. I mean, you're going to take some chill time. I think everything is going to be brilliant. You're going to get so many more ideas. Really appreciate you coming on. I know my audience are going to absolutely love this, and it's just the sort of thing we need to be pushing out a lot more. So, Phil, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It's amazing, Phil. I really appreciate it. I think that was, I thought you speak really well, and the way you put it across is energetic and engaging. Honestly, you've got a career on the stage, but I mean, I know a lot of people, your message is one that is heavily nuanced, isn't it? So I guess it's not.
Yeah. I'm just very mindful of not wanting to say anything that can be misinterpreted, because if it can be, you get cancel culture and all that rubbish. Yeah. So it's just making sure. I don't think I said anything too controversially offensive. So
no, I don't think so. I think we kept it pretty chill. We could deep dive onto some of this stuff. I mean, when I did therapy, the guy was like a body therapist. I went for maybe 5 or 6 sessions, and I felt he wanted a lot more talking. The words he was using, and when you said that about the action words, it kind of clicked with me a little bit. I was like, that's what was wrong. The guy wasn't talking about sacrifice, commitment, and work, and all this kind of stuff that men understand. It wasn't about that. It was about feelings and expressing myself.
And that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you and this is the problem. So many the mistake many therapists make. It's that if you're working with someone and it's feelings, emotions, and empathic reflections, fine. If it works and it helps, great. I have seen loads of men where they saw a previous therapist. That is predominantly what I saw a guy yesterday, for example. That is what the previous therapist did, and it wasn't enough. And what some therapists have done is they're pathologizing that. Oh, why is that not enough? Is it toxic masculinity? Why is he not ready for therapy? And I'm like, no. Why are you not considering how to change your approach to make it more accessible to him? And it's that whole idea that we can't accept that there are average sex differences between males and females, and that females, on average, will want emotions, talking, all that. Males, on average, well, it's not saying that's how it should be. Yeah. It's just how it is naturally, and that's fine. And so if you're using that feelings, emotion stuff and it works, fine. If it doesn't work, add to it. And sometimes it's just using sort of very action-orientated language. Rather than focusing just on feelings, focus more on action, solution, barriers, overcoming hurdles, that sort of things. Sometimes changing the way you perceive things, all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's the thing, because ultimately, I think if we were to say, what we often say to guys is, well, just sit there, be vulnerable, be okay, express your feelings. Why can't you do that, right? Well, that seems to be an acceptable thing to say. But if we ever said to women engaging in therapy, why do you have to talk about your feelings? Why can't you just take action and do something? There would be outrage. There'd be absolute outrage. And it's almost as if there's this underlying implication that we're saying men need to engage in therapy like women do. But there'd be outrage if we ever implied women need to engage in therapy like men do. Why can't we just accept there are differences? And those differences are fine. They're not harmful. And if you accept those differences and utilise them, then you get guys that will hopefully increase their chances of getting a positive outcome from therapy.
Oh, wouldn't it be great if we all could do that? Phil, can I, this end bit as well we've just had, can I still use that as well, like a bit of a added?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted.
As long as it looks okay and not.
Yeah. No, it's great. I really appreciate it. Look, I really appreciate your time. I will tag you on Twitter when it comes out. It's just going to be this. It's not going to be anything crazy. I'm not going to reintroduce anything. I'm just going to literally hit the play button and put it up.
And you'll put it on YouTube, I'm guessing, yeah?
Yeah, I will be. So I'll be on my channel on YouTube. I'll send you the link for that, and then you'll see people commenting below. Now, of course, getting back into this kind of podcasting space is a bit new for me. So I'll socialize it on my Facebook as well, because I've got one there. I'll probably put like an Insta thing. But this is not content that's going to get negative reviews. Not for my audience. It's content that's going to be. It's going to be positive, you know.
I think that's useful, because if anyone does see it and they'll come up with, you're a misogynist or whatever and all of that rubbish, then I can kind of say, well, let's look at the comments below. And if guys are commenting saying this was useful and all that, then
you know my audience.
I feel a bit apprehensive, because being a therapist means you've got to be very careful what you say, and it's
You say that though, but remember what Peterson was saying about. Think about the hate that Peterson gets, and we'd all go to Peterson, wouldn't we? Like, if I could take 15 minutes of Peterson's time, I'd be like, right, just help me sort my life out, Peterson. You know what I mean? How much would we pay for that sort of thing? It'd be quite impressive. And you're obviously going in the same vein.
I'm not high profile like Jordan Peterson, and I can't afford the lawyer fees. He can.
Yeah, you can't afford the lawyer fees. I know. How on earth has he managed to? I know, exactly. We can't afford that yet, can we? It's a matter of time, isn't it, before your greatness is unraveled. And brilliant. But look, I really appreciate it. But I'll tag you into stuff anyway. I'll probably get it done today or tomorrow. We'll get it out, and then
remind me what your Twitter is, because I think if it's okay, I'll just put that this has happened.
Yeah.
Coming out soon, and
I can send you some screenshots if you want. I can send you a screenshot of it straight away if you want.
Yeah, good. And what's your Twitter again? Remind me.
At @TimDavies_UK. I think we follow each other. Yeah, at @TimDavies_UK, and then I'll send you. What I'll do is I'll send you a screenshot of this kind of thing in a second. I'll just screenshot it, send it to you on an email, and then if you want to put those up and go, hey, I just did a podcast coming out soon. That's cool. And then I'll get it out. I'm sure I can get it out today because it's a straight record.
Whatever, okay.
Yeah, I'll make us look really cool. Okay, like that. All right, I appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right.
Take good care.
Take care, and you take care. Bye bye.